The Clockmaker's Apprentice by Lilly Barnett. Copyright 2025 by Lilly Barnett, all rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopy, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the author, except for brief quotations used in reviews or scholarly works. This book may not be used in whole or in part for the development, training, or enhancement of artificial intelligence systems, including but not limited to language models, without the express written consent of the author. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The bell above the shop door jingled, a quaint, charming sound that always reminded Elliot of his grandfather. It was the sort of chime you couldn't find in modern stores. It had an old-world warmth, the kind that made you feel like you'd stepped back in time, even though it was more than a little out of place in the 21st century. The shop, Perrin & Sons Timepieces, was an island of old-world craftsmanship, with oak shelves rising like battlements, each one crowded with timepieces of every imaginable variety. Mantel clocks with brass finials shared space with carved cuckoos that hadn't sung in decades. Tiny carriage clocks winked in the lamplight, their delicate hands frozen in 100 different hours. Dust motes danced in the air, catching the glow of the overhead lamps and adding a sort of hush to the place, a hush that felt like a memory. Elliot sighed and ran a hand through his hair, his fingers snagging on the stubborn cowlick at his temple. He'd inherited this shop 3 months ago, 3 months of trying to be a businessman, a craftsman, and a caretaker of a legacy he wasn't sure he deserved. Every morning, he unlocked the front door and flipped the wooden sign from closed to open, and every evening he flipped it back again, the motion starting to feel more like ritual than hope. A brass carriage clock on the far shelf ticked out the minutes with precise, deliberate clicks, each one a small reminder that time was always moving forward, no matter how much he wished it would pause. His grandfather had always seemed ageless, his voice low and gentle as he explained escapements and balance springs. He'd worn his spectacles on a chain and had a way of peering over them that made Elliot feel both important and inadequate at the same time. The day he'd handed Elliot the keys to the shop, 2 days before he died, he'd simply said, "Keep the clocks honest, Elliot," and never stop listening. Elliot still wasn't sure what that meant. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, and Elliot glanced outside. Rain, a thin drizzle that blurred the glass. London weather, predictable even in summer. He turned back to the counter and rummaged for a rag to polish the glass. His hand brushed something hard and cold, something that didn't belong with the usual clutter of receipts and spare parts. Elliot's fingers closed around it and drew it out. A pocket watch, heavier than it looked, its case etched with intricate floral patterns that swirled like vines on a cathedral ceiling. He turned it over, half expecting a maker's mark or hallmark, but there was none, only a small crescent-shaped keyhole in the center of the backplate, unusual even for an antique. He frowned. Most old pocket watches opened with a simple hinge or button. A keyhole in the middle? That was strange. On the inside of the lid, faint but unmistakable, was a pair of initials, LH, engraved in a delicate script that looked like it belonged to a different century. LH, he muttered under his breath. Not his grandfather's initials, not his own. Whoever this belonged to, they weren't from his side of the family. And yet the craftsmanship, he ran his thumb across the filigree, feeling the delicate notches and swirls, was unmistakable. This was quality work, the kind of watchmaking his grandfather had prized above all else. He pressed the catch, expecting the lid to snap open. It didn't budge. Elliot frowned, tried twisting it gently. Nothing. Curiosity, that old familiar itch, unfurled in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd gotten as a boy whenever his grandfather had let him hold a rare watch. A sense that he was holding more than gears and springs, that time itself lived inside these tiny, fragile cases. He brought the watch closer to his ear and held his breath. A faint ticking, so soft it was almost imagined, rose from the watch. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. No watch should tick if it hadn't been wound. He hadn't wound it, and it certainly hadn't been serviced in decades. A shiver danced down his spine, the hair at the nape of his neck prickling with something between dread and wonder. He set the watch down, as if it might bite him, then reached for his grandfather's old leather-bound journal, a battered thing that smelled like linseed oil and time itself. The pages were filled with neat, looping script, sketches of escapements, notes about clients, the occasional poetic ramble about time's passing. He flipped through, scanning the pages for anything that might explain the watch with the crescent keyhole and the impossible ticking. Nothing. His gaze drifted to the workbench by the window. It was just as his grandfather had left it. Small screwdrivers laid out like surgical instruments, magnifying glasses arranged in order of strength. A half-finished carriage clock rested on its side, its innards exposed like a tiny brass heart. Elliot closed his eyes. The smell of oil and brass was as familiar to him as his own breath. "Keep the clocks honest," his grandfather had said. But what if a clock wasn't honest? What if it ticked on its own, defying logic and craftsmanship alike? Outside, the rain came harder, drumming against the window with the relentless rhythm of time itself. Elliot felt the shop close in around him, the tick-tick-tick of 100 clocks forming a chorus that rose and fell like the tide. He looked at the watch again, the initials, the impossible tick, the sense that it didn't belong here, or maybe that he didn't. His chest tightened with a feeling he couldn't name. He had to know where this watch had come from, and why, after all these years, it was ticking, just for him. Chapter 2. The Time Slip. The watch sat on the counter like a challenge, its delicate ticking defying logic, its brass casing gleaming softly in the lamplight. Elliot couldn't tear his gaze away. The air in the shop felt different now, charged, somehow, as if the watch itself had drawn the atmosphere tight around him. He reached out, almost afraid it might vanish if he blinked, and picked it up. The warmth of it startled him, as though it had been sitting in sunlight, not left neglected in a dusty drawer. His fingers traced the crescent-shaped keyhole. Something about it felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its final piece. A thrill of curiosity surged through him, the same kind he'd felt as a boy whenever his grandfather had unlocked a particularly complicated mechanism. On a whim, he rummaged through the small drawer beneath the workbench where his grandfather kept old winding keys. Most were standard, small, practical brass instruments with well-worn teeth. But nestled in the corner was a key unlike any he'd seen before, a crescent moon handle, just the right shape to fit the watch's peculiar keyhole. He picked it up, the metal cool and oddly heavy in his palm. A voice in his mind, a memory, echoed his grandfather's words. "Keep the clocks honest, Elliot, and never stop listening." He turned the key, fitting it carefully into the watch's backplate. It slid home with a satisfying click. A soft hum rose from the mechanism, a sound so low he felt it rather than heard it. The watch vibrated gently, the ticking growing louder, faster, a rhythm that matched the frantic pounding of his own heart. The air around him seemed to bend, the shop's corners wavering like candle flames. Shadows deepened and shifted, stretching across the walls until the shelves blurred into darkness. Elliot's breath hitched. He tried to pull the key out, but it wouldn't budge. The ticking accelerated, tick, 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 until it was no longer a sound but a roar, like the rush of 1,000 gears all spinning at once. "Wait!" Light exploded from the watch, blinding him. He flung up an arm to shield his eyes, but the light burned through his eyelids, searing into his mind. And then, silence. He lowered his arm slowly, blinking hard. The workshop was gone. The shelves of clocks, the glass counter, the smell of brass and oil, all of it had vanished. In its place stood a cramped, low-ceilinged room, illuminated by a single oil lamp on a workbench. The scent of burning whale oil tickled his nose, mingling with the metallic tang of iron filings. Tools were scattered across the surface, each one worn but lovingly maintained. Elliot turned in a slow circle, his head spinning. The room was narrow, the walls lined with wooden shelves sagging under the weight of clock cases, brass gears, and half-finished mechanisms. A battered stool sat by the workbench, its seat polished smooth from years of use. He reached for his phone out of habit, only to find it gone. No phone, no modern trappings, Just his clothes, the watch still clutched in his hand, and the trembling certainty that he was very, very far from home. "Who the devil are you?" The voice startled him. He whirled around, nearly dropping the watch. A young woman stood in the doorway, a brass candlestick in one hand and a small hammer in the other, as if she'd intended to fix a clock but wasn't opposed to using the hammer as a weapon. She wore a linen apron streaked with oil, her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms smudged with soot. Her hair, dark auburn, tied up in a loose braid, escaped in wild tendrils that framed a pair of shrewd, suspicious eyes. "Don't just stand there gaping," she snapped, taking a cautious step forward. "I asked you a question." Elliot opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His voice felt trapped in his throat. "Are you a thief?" she demanded. "A burglar come to steal my father's tools, because I'll have you know I'm armed." She brandished the hammer for emphasis. I'm not a thief," he stammered. She narrowed her eyes. "Then what are you doing in my father's workshop at?" She paused to glance at the clock on the wall, a simple oak case with a swinging pendulum. 10:30 at night? Elliot followed her gaze. The clock read 10:30, but the style was all wrong, too plain, too old-fashioned. Where am I?" he managed. She blinked at him as if he'd asked her if clocks could talk. "You're in Mr. Halewood's clockmaker's workshop on Finch Lane in London, obviously." London, Finch Lane. But this wasn't the London he knew. The oil lamp, the smell of soot, the battered wooden floors, the clothes she wore, rough-spun linen, sturdy boots, belonged to another time. He stared at her. "What year is it?" She tilted her head, a small frown knitting her brow. "Have you hit your head?" "Please," he said, voice cracking. "What year is it?" 1824, she said slowly, suspicion giving way to curiosity. "Now answer me. Who are you?" Elliot's mouth went dry. 1824. He was in 1824. "My name is Elliot Perrin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I've come a long way to get here." She lowered the hammer slightly, eyes narrowing. "Are you mad?" "Probably," he admitted. The girl eyed the pocket watch in his hand. "That's a curious piece," she said, stepping closer, her hammer forgotten now. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the casing. "Where did you get it?" It belonged to my grandfather," Elliot said, swallowing hard. "I think it brought me here." She arched an eyebrow, as if weighing his words. "Well," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, "my name is Lydia Halewood, and if that watch is what brought you here, you'd better come inside before my father finds you. He'd tan my hide for letting a stranger in." She gestured for him to follow her deeper into the workshop. Elliot hesitated, clutching the watch like a lifeline. "Come on, then," she said, her eyes flashing with a mix of amusement and exasperation. "We've got work to do." Elliot took a deep breath, stepping forward into a world that felt both impossibly old and heartbreakingly new. Chapter 3. Gears and Sparks. Elliot followed Lydia through the narrow corridor that opened into a larger workspace, lit by two oil lamps that cast golden pools of light on wooden benches strewn with brass cogs, screwdrivers, tiny vials of oil, and springs so delicate they looked like spider silk. The air smelled of metal filings, linseed oil, and something warm, like old paper and worn leather. The walls were lined with clocks in various states of disassembly, their faces like blank, unblinking eyes watching every move. Lydia moved with an easy confidence, pushing back loose tendrils of hair that had fallen from her braid. She gestured at an empty stool next to a cluttered bench. "Sit," she said, as if she were giving orders to a newly hired apprentice. "If you're going to stand around gawking, you might as well be useful." Elliot sat, his knees brushing the edge of the workbench. He placed the strange pocket watch carefully in his lap, though he kept one hand wrapped around it as if it might disappear at any moment. Lydia rummaged through a pile of clock cases, muttering under her breath, and pulled out a small brass carriage clock whose innards were laid bare, its escapement dangling like a loose tooth. She placed it between them and sighed. "Father's had this on the bench for days now. Claims he's too busy with orders to fix it. I reckon he's avoiding it because it's tricky." Elliot leaned in, his curiosity piqued despite the shock of his sudden arrival. "What's wrong with it?" She shot him a sharp look, as if testing his knowledge. "The balance staff is cracked, the mainspring's worn thin too." Elliot's heart lifted. Clock repair. Finally, something that made sense. Do you have a replacement staff? He asked, already reaching for the small drawer where such parts might be kept. Lydia's eyes widened, then a grin curved her lips. You do know something about clocks. My grandfather was a watchmaker, Elliot said, his fingers finding the staff almost by instinct. He taught me enough to hold my own. She nodded approvingly. Good, then you can help. They bent over the clock together, the lamplight making her hair glow like polished copper. Elliot felt the tension of the past hour ease as he focused on the familiar rhythm of clockwork. The soft click of brass against steel, the scent of oil warming under his touch. As they worked, Lydia's movements were quick and sure, her fingers deftly handling the delicate pieces. But every now and then, she'd glance at him with a mix of curiosity and something softer, something that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. So, she said after a while, not looking up from the balance staff she was fitting, you said that watch brought you here. What did you mean? Elliot hesitated. The truth sounded mad even in his own head, but the memory of that blinding light, the impossible ticking, he couldn't deny it had happened. I was in my grandfather's shop, he began, his voice low. It was in London too, but in the year 2025. Lydia's hands stilled. She lifted her gaze to his, her eyes wide. You're serious? He nodded. I know it sounds crazy, but the watch, your watch, I think, did something. It hummed, it glowed, and then I was here. She leaned back, her lips parting slightly, but she shook her head, as if chasing off cobwebs. That's impossible. Is it? He asked. Because unless you can explain how I got here dressed like this, he gestured at his jeans and hoodie, then I think we're both in the same boat. A small laugh escaped her, half disbelieving, half delighted. You do look ridiculous. She teased, her eyes crinkling at the corners, like you escaped from Bedlam. He smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed since arriving. You're not the first to say that. Lydia's gaze softened, lingering on his face. Well, Bedlam or not, you've got a steady hand, she said, nodding at the balance staff he'd just fitted. Better than half the apprentices in this city. Thanks, he murmured. She cleared her throat and leaned forward, her braids swinging over her shoulder. So, Elliot Perrin from the future, she said, her tone half mocking, half wondering. Do you have any idea why that watch brought you here? And why it's ticking when it shouldn't? He stared at the pocket watch resting on the bench, its etched casing gleaming softly. I don't know, he admitted, but it feels important, like it's more than just a timepiece. Lydia's fingers brushed the watch, lingering for a moment before she pulled back, almost shyly. It belonged to my mother, she said quietly. She died when I was small. Father kept it locked away after she passed, said it was too delicate for daily use. Elliot felt his chest tighten. I'm sorry, he said, his voice gentle. She shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. It was a long time ago, but I always wondered why she loved that watch so much. They sat in silence, the clock between them ticking with a soft, comforting rhythm. Outside, a horse's hooves clopped down the cobbled lane, fading into the night. Lydia broke the quiet with a determined exhale. If that watch brought you here, then maybe it's trying to tell us something. Or maybe, she hesitated, maybe it's the missing piece in a puzzle I've been trying to solve for years. Elliot's brow furrowed. What puzzle? She stood and crossed the workshop, rummaging through a stack of papers and ledgers until she found a folded sheet of parchment. She brought it back and laid it on the bench between them. It was a letter, yellowed with age and covered in spidery handwriting. The edges were frayed, and a small wax seal, broken now, clung stubbornly to the corner. My mother wrote this just before she died, Lydia said, her voice hushed. I never understood it, until now. Elliot leaned in, the words blurring for a moment before sharpening under the lamplight. To my dearest Lydia, when the time is right, the watch will reveal its secret. Trust it, and trust your heart. Love always, Mother. Elliot's pulse quickened. Do you think, he whispered, that watch was waiting for me? Lydia met his gaze, her eyes bright with something fierce and defiant. Maybe, she said, or maybe we were both waiting for each other. The clock on the bench ticked steadily between them, like a heartbeat shared. Chapter 4. The Hidden Secret. Elliot read the letter again, mouthing the words silently, as if the right inflection might unlock more than just their meaning. The parchment trembled slightly between his fingers, not from any breeze, but from the unsteady rhythm of his breath. Trust it, and trust your heart. He looked up. Lydia stood across from him, arms folded tightly over her chest as if holding herself together. "She wrote this before she died?" he asked. Lydia nodded. "I was 6 when she passed. Fever. Quick, sudden. My father never spoke of her much after. He buried himself in his work. I only found that letter 2 years ago, hidden behind the false bottom of her old sewing box." "And the watch?" Elliot gestured to the strange timepiece still ticking steadily on the bench. "That was hers. She wore it every day, even when working in the garden." Her expression softened. "She used to tell me stories about time, how it was a living thing, not just numbers, how some watches didn't just tell time, but knew it." Elliot tilted his head. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "She was different," Lydia said, "and she believed in things my father still calls nonsense." There was a quiet between them, not silence, never in a clockmaker's workshop, where ticking was constant, but a thoughtful, suspended quiet. Lydia suddenly moved to the back of the room, toward a tall clock case that leaned against the wall, half-gutted and patiently waiting its turn for restoration. She knelt beside it, pulled open the narrow door at its base, and withdrew a stack of wooden drawers. "I've gone through every letter, every drawing, every record my father kept," she said, hauling one drawer up onto the bench. "Looking for something, anything, that might explain her words." She began pulling out stacks of sketches, detailed illustrations of gears, spring barrels, lever escapements. Then, at the bottom of the drawer, tucked behind a curling sheet of vellum, she found something she'd never noticed before: a thick, dust-covered repair ledger bound in red leather. "That's not his handwriting," she murmured, flipping open the front page. Elliot peered over her shoulder. The script was elegant, looped and slightly slanted. It didn't match the rough, utilitarian notes from Lydia's father. "Your mother's?" he asked. Lydia nodded slowly. "She trained with him before they married. Father never admitted it, but she had a natural touch. She kept her own records." They turned the pages together, lists of customer names, dates, and detailed repair notes. A brass regulator from a Mr. P. Turner, a fused fusee from a widow Clark, and then one line, dated 3 months before Lydia's mother died, that made her breath catch. Client brought in duplicate timepiece of unusual design, matches personal heirloom, warned of mechanical inconsistencies, retained for comparison. The initials next to the entry, LH. "Wait," Elliot pointed. "LH, same as the engraving on the watch." Lydia stared at the page. "That's my mother's mark." "Do you think this duplicate was mine?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers skimmed the edge of the page, lingering like the stroke of a memory. "It says she retained it," she whispered. "It should still be here." Without a word, she leapt to her feet and crossed the workshop, heading for a row of narrow cubby drawers built into the far wall. She opened them one by one, mechanical bits clinking, paper rustling. The air felt tighter somehow, like the room was holding its breath. "Here," she said finally. She returned with a heavy, square clock base. The casing was finely carved walnut, but the face was gone, leaving only the bare mechanism inside. It looked like an ordinary mantel clock, until Lydia turned it over. Etched into the bottom panel was the same swirling floral pattern from Elliot's watch. At the center, a crescent keyhole. Elliot stepped back. "That's it." Lydia set the piece down on the bench and pressed her fingertips against the base. "There's a false compartment," she murmured. "I remember this model. If you lift the catch here..." With a soft click, the panel slid back to reveal a hidden cavity. Inside, a folded sheet of paper and an empty watch case, its glass cracked and rim tarnished. The watch itself was gone. Lydia picked up the paper with trembling hands. "Another letter?" Elliot asked gently. She nodded, eyes scanning the faded ink. "To my dearest Thomas, if something should happen to me, know this: the watch we built is not an ordinary device. I fear someone has learned of its nature, someone who means to take it. I've hidden its twin and left clues only Lydia might follow, should the day come. Protect her. And remember, time does not forgive, but it sometimes gives second chances." There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably the same. Lydia sat slowly on the stool, the paper crinkling in her hands. She made two, she said softly. 2 watches. One must have been taken. The other ended up with you. And whoever took it, Elliot said grimly, might still be out there. They stared at each other, realization dawning in twin flashes of dread and fascination. This isn't just a fluke, Lydia whispered. You coming here, the letter, the watch. It's part of something she planned. A trail, a warning. Elliot turned the pocket watch in his hand. It ticked steadily, calmly, as if nothing at all were out of place. And yet everything was. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves of the fig tree by the window, casting shifting shadows along the wall. The shop's many clocks chimed 11 in staggered chorus, their voices rising like questions without answers. Lydia stood. I need to speak with my father, she said, voice firm now. If he knew about any of this, he'll have answers. Elliot nodded, sliding the watch safely into his coat pocket. I'll go with you. She didn't argue. She simply grabbed her coat from the peg near the door and tossed him a wool scarf. We'll take the long way, she said. Past Hawthorne's shop. I want to see something. Hawthorne? He asked. Her mouth tightened into a line. My father's old rival. He used to apprentice with them, until a scandal nearly ruined our family's name. Elliot felt his pulse quicken. What kind of scandal? Lydia looked over her shoulder, already halfway to the door, the kind that starts with a stolen watch. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Race against time. The air outside the workshop was sharp with the sting of midnight. Fog curled along the cobbled street like restless fingers, dimming the yellow glow of the gas lamps and cloaking the city in hush. Lydia walked quickly, her boots tapping out a steady rhythm beside Elliot's softer footfalls. The scarf she'd tossed him was scratchy, but it helped ward off the chill that bit through his hoodie. She didn't speak at first, just moved with a quiet urgency, her eyes scanning shadows, her mouth set in a determined line. They passed shuttered storefronts and the silhouettes of narrow brick buildings, some sagging, some crooked like they'd been built with a slant toward secrecy. London in 1824 was darker, denser than Elliot had imagined, alive with creaks and carriage wheels, with the occasional hiss of steam from hidden vents. I still don't understand, he said at last, voice low. If your mother made 2 watches, why would someone want to steal one? Lydia didn't slow her pace. Because they weren't ordinary. She was working on something she didn't even tell my father about, I think. And if someone found out... You think it was this Hawthorne? She glanced at him. His family and mine were rivals in every sense. My grandfather trained with his. They co-owned a shop once, but something happened, something neither side ever talks about. Then my father took over Halewood's alone, and Tobias Hawthorne set up shop across town. They've despised each other ever since. So what makes you think he's connected to the missing watch? Lydia hesitated. Because last year, he came by asking about one of my mother's old commissions. Said a collector had questions. But the way he asked, it wasn't curiosity. It was as if he already knew something. They turned down a narrow alley flanked by shuttered windows and creeping ivy. At the end sat a squat brick building with a crooked sign swaying above the door. Hawthorne and Sons, horologists. The windows were dark. Looks closed, Elliot said. It's never closed, Lydia replied. Not for him. She stepped up to the door and knocked sharply. When no one answered, she knocked again, harder. A minute passed. Then, behind the door, came the unmistakable sound of a bolt sliding free. The door creaked open to reveal a man in a deep blue waistcoat, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, fingers stained with oil. His hair was dark and slicked back, and his expression turned guarded the instant he saw Lydia. Miss Halewood, he said slowly, voice edged with ice. To what do I owe the late-night disturbance? Lydia didn't blink. I have a question about one of my mother's commissions. The man's eyes narrowed. Your mother has been dead a long time. She left something behind, something that might have passed through your hands. He smirked faintly. Still chasing ghosts, are we? Elliot stepped forward. We're looking for a watch, one with a crescent keyhole. You wouldn't happen to know where it is, would you? Hawthorne's gaze flicked to Elliot, sharp and assessing. And who might you be? A friend. I see. He looked back at Lydia. I believe I've answered enough of your family's questions over the years. Good night. He started to close the door. Lydia blocked it with her boot. We know it was taken, she said, her voice low. We know my mother built 2. Hawthorne's face twitched, barely, but enough. "You know what happens to people who dig up the past?" he said softly. "They find rot." Elliot stepped beside her. "We found the letter, her notes. We know you came asking about it last year. Why?" Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "You should walk away now, both of you." Then he shut the door, this time hard. Lydia stood frozen for a moment, staring at the wood. "He knows something," she whispered. "Did you see the way his eyes shifted? That was guilt." Elliot nodded. He was nervous. You don't slam a door unless you're hiding something behind it. She turned to him, her voice quick. "Come on, there's another way." They rounded the building, ducking into a side alley filled with stacked crates and the smell of ash. A low window sat just above eye level, its glass fogged but cracked open at the top. Lydia reached up and tested it, then shoved it higher. "You're not seriously," Elliot began. But she was already climbing, her boot finding a foothold in the stacked crates. She pulled herself through with practiced grace. A few seconds later, the window creaked again and her hand appeared, beckoning. "Your turn." Elliot sighed, then climbed after her, grunting as the wood scraped his side. He dropped to the floor inside with a quiet thud. The room was dark and smelled of old wood and brass polish. Lydia lit a match and found an oil lamp on a shelf. Its soft glow revealed a cramped storage room filled with shelves of old clock cases, wooden crates, and unlabeled drawers. "We need to find his repair logs," she whispered. "If he's still working on the watch, he'll have a record." They split up, careful not to knock anything over. Elliot rifled through drawers while Lydia scanned a dusty bookshelf filled with ledgers. "Here," she said. He crossed to her as she flipped through a narrow book bound in faded red leather. Near the back, she found it. Item, twin mechanism, crescent key, damaged balance. Not for sale. Client refused disclosure, filed under special. There was no date. "No name," Elliot murmured. "Just special." Lydia's eyes burned. "He has it. He's hiding it. And he's lying about it." They heard a creak behind them. Lydia blew out the lamp. Footsteps, heavy ones, drawing closer. Elliot grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a tall cabinet. They held their breath as the footsteps passed, slow, deliberate, just beyond the door. A door opened, closed, then silence. Lydia leaned in, her lips close to Elliot's ear. "We can't stay here," he nodded, heart hammering. She whispered, "But now we know the truth. We just need to get the watch back." Outside, the fog thickened, and somewhere, faint and distant, the city's bells began to toll midnight. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. They didn't speak until they were 2 streets away from Hawthorne's shop, their breath visible in the cold air, fog curling low along the gutters like it was trying to eavesdrop. Lydia's face was pale with fury. Elliot's heartbeat hadn't returned to normal. Neither had his grip on her hand, which had lingered longer than strictly necessary. Lydia pulled them into the alcove of a closed tailor's shop and leaned against the door, eyes flashing. "He has it. I know he does." "He's hiding something," Elliot agreed, voice still hushed. "But he doesn't know we saw the record." She looked at him, jaw clenched. "We go back, now." Elliot paused. "Shouldn't we tell your father first?" She shook her head. "He'll just tell me to let it go. He always does." "No, this time I want the truth. I want what belonged to my mother." Before Elliot could answer, she was already moving. Back through the alleys they went, this time not for stealth, but for speed. The back window was still ajar. Lydia went up first again, nimble as a cat, and Elliot followed with a grunt and a scraped shin. Inside, the lamp they'd used earlier was gone. The room was darker, but they didn't need light. They knew where the ledger had been, and they knew what it meant. They crept forward. The hallway from the storeroom led to the front shop, and through the doorway they could hear movement, the low chime of metal on metal, a mutter, a sigh. Hawthorne. Lydia didn't hesitate. She stepped into the doorway. "You lied to me." Elliot followed, heart thudding. The older man stood behind his front counter, sleeves still rolled up, brass tweezers in one hand. His expression didn't shift when he saw them, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "I thought I told you good night," he said flatly. "You told me a lot of things," Lydia said, "all of them worthless." She stepped further into the room. Elliot saw then what she was staring at, the watch. Her mother's second watch. It lay open on a velvet cloth on the workbench, its case nearly identical to the one Elliot carried, though its internal workings were exposed. Fragile, delicate, and glowing faintly. You stole that, she said. Hawthorne didn't flinch. Your mother left it behind. You knew what it was. And that's why you came to the shop last year. The older man's mouth twitched. I suspected, but I didn't know for sure. Not until recently. Elliot stepped beside Lydia, his voice calm. You've had it all this time. What were you trying to do? Replicate it? I was trying to understand it, Hawthorne said, but it won't open properly. It ticks sometimes. Then it stops. Then it starts again, like it's waiting for something. He looked up, eyes sharp. And then you arrived. Elliot's stomach dropped. You knew. I didn't know how it worked, but I knew what it was meant to do. A temporal anchor, a tether. Your mother called it a resonant twin mechanism. I found the phrase in a letter she wrote, one she never sent. He stepped around the bench slowly, casually. And when I saw you at my door tonight, with her face looking back at me through your eyes, Lydia, I knew it had started. The mechanism was awake. You had no right, Lydia said, voice cracking. I had every right, he snapped. She created something that defied reason. And your father, he buried it, let it rot in drawers and dust. His hands curled into fists. Your mother was brilliant. She could have changed the world. You mean own the world, Elliot said coldly. That's what this is about. Hawthorne's expression sharpened. It was wasted on your family, on sentiment. He turned back to the watch on the velvet cloth. It's incomplete, damaged, but it could still work, with a bridge, a stabilizer. If it could be calibrated, it could open time like a doorway. Elliot took a step forward. It already does. Hawthorne's eyes flicked to him, curious. You know how it works. I know how to fix it. Lydia grabbed his arm. Elliot. But Elliot held Hawthorne's gaze. You've been trying to replicate a function you don't understand. You've probably stripped the escapement 3 times already. Hawthorne scowled. Twice. Elliot stepped to the bench, slow, deliberate. Then you're lucky it hasn't shattered the balance wheel. He reached out, picked up the tools with steady hands, and leaned over the watch. It was like its twin, but there were subtle differences. Scratches, abrasions where someone had tampered. The resonance spring had been misaligned. The harmony fork bent just slightly off axis. This wasn't designed to work alone, he murmured. It needs its pair. He took the watch from his pocket and laid it beside its twin. The air shifted, thickened, like the moment before a storm breaks. A soft hum rose from both timepieces, a low harmonic pulse that grew steadily into vibration. What are you doing? Hawthorne asked, suddenly wary. Elliot didn't look up, restoring the bond. He turned the key slowly in his own watch. The tick returned, soft but steady. Then he reached over and made a single-minute adjustment to the damaged twin spring. Click. Both watches ticked in unison. Hawthorne stared. How? The hum deepened. The workshop lights dimmed, and the 2 timepieces began to glow. Not hot, but golden, as if lit from within. They cast reflections in each other's brass casing, like mirrors facing into forever. Lydia stepped back. Elliot? He met her gaze. We have to take it, now. Hawthorne's voice turned sharp. You're not leaving with that. He reached for the watch, but Lydia moved first. She caught his wrist mid-motion and twisted sharply, forcing him to stumble back. The movement was quick, practiced. Elliot blinked. You just judoed him, he said. Clockmaker's daughters aren't defenseless, she muttered. Elliot grabbed the restored watch, wrapped it in cloth, and backed toward the door. Hawthorne's face was red now. You're fools. You don't understand what you're holding. Maybe not, Elliot said. But we're smart enough to know it doesn't belong to you. Lydia yanked open the door. Cold air poured in. Elliot turned back once. You studied time, Mr. Hawthorne. Maybe you forgot. It's not just gears and springs. It's about timing, and yours just ran out. Then he followed Lydia into the night. Chapter 7. The Farewell. The fog had thickened into mist as Lydia and Elliot emerged from the narrow side street, the stolen watch clutched in his coat. The city felt dreamlike now, its edges blurring, the gas lamps hazy, flickering things. Time, like the air, was unstable, shimmering at the seams. They didn't speak as they walked. Words would have felt fragile in that moment, like glass over cobblestones. When they reached the edge of Finch Lane, Lydia stopped beneath the fig tree beside her father's shop. Its leaves trembled, rain slicked and silvered in the gaslight. Is it happening? She asked. Elliot pulled out the 2 watches. Both ticked in perfect rhythm, the same golden glow pulsing from their cores like the last beats of a dying star. The resonance between them was no longer subtle. It was loud in the bones, like a second heartbeat. He looked up at her. "It's building. The energy's too strong. They're drawing me back." She nodded. Her face was calm, but her hands were balled into fists. "I don't want to go," he said quietly. "You have to," she replied, though her voice cracked at the edges. "You don't belong here." And he waited, watching her. The fog clung to her braid, to her lashes. She looked carved out of light and dusk. "You've given me more answers in 2 nights than I've had in 20 years, she whispered. "You helped me believe my mother wasn't just eccentric or foolish, that she left something behind, something real." "You are something real," Elliot said, stepping closer. "Lydia, you're—" A surge of vibration from the watches cut him off, their light growing brighter, filling the street with soft gold. The watches had begun to hum louder now, the pitch climbing, not painful but urgent. She swallowed hard. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less." She looked away then, down the lane, as if memorizing the shapes of rooftops, the soft glint of wet stones. Then she looked back at him. "Tell me what it's like," she said. "Where you're from." He took a breath. "It's louder, faster. We move too quickly. We forget to listen. We think we're better because we have machines that do things faster. But we don't make things with our hands anymore, not like this." He glanced back at the workshop. "Your time is slower, but it breathes. It has heart." Lydia's eyes shimmered. "Sounds lonely." "It can be." But he reached for her hand. She let him take it. "But if I go back now, having known you," he said, "I won't be." The light around them flared, a sudden gust of warm wind whipping past like a wave, catching leaves from the fig tree and scattering them in a spiral. Lydia stepped closer, both of her hands holding his now. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Not you, not this impossible feeling." Elliot leaned in, their foreheads nearly touching. "Neither did I." He looked into her eyes, searching for something to anchor him, something to hold on to. But already the air felt thinner. The light from the watches bled up his arms like gold ink, soaking into the fibers of his sleeves, into his skin. "It's happening." "Then say it," she whispered. "Whatever you were going to." His voice shook. She pressed his hand to her heart. "Please." "I think." But the word never came. The light burst from both watches in a radiant flare, blinding and soundless, engulfing everything. For one suspended moment, Elliot felt weightless, without shape, without name. He reached for her, saw her mouth forming his name, but he couldn't hear it, couldn't hold her. And then she was gone. There was a crack like the world unzipping. Elliot slammed into the floor of his grandfather's workshop with a grunt, landing on the old wood with a jolt that knocked the breath out of him. The light was gone. So was the fog. So was Lydia. The shop was quiet. Night still reigned outside, but it was modern darkness now. Amber street lamps humming, the soft whir of passing tires, a distant siren 3 blocks away. The ticking of clocks resumed, but it sounded wrong now. Hollow. Off rhythm. Elliot sat up, his coat still damp, his hands still trembling. Both watches lay beside him, one cracked, one whole. The glow had vanished. He picked up Lydia's watch, her mother's second watch, and held it to his ear. Tick, 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 still working, still hers. He turned it over. The initials were there, LH. But below them, in the inner curve of the brass, something new had been etched, so faint he might have missed it if not for the angle of the desk lamp. A single word in the same delicate script, remember. Elliot sat back, cradling the timepiece in both hands. He wouldn't forget. He couldn't. Chapter 8. Home, but changed. Morning came slowly, gray light crawling across the floorboards of the workshop. Elliot hadn't slept. He sat slouched in the worn stool by the workbench, Lydia's watch in one hand, his own lying beside it. The rest of the shop stood around him like silent witnesses, grandfather clocks ticking in sympathetic rhythm, wall clocks talking softly on the minute. In the hush, he could almost hear her voice. We were both waiting for each other. The tools lay untouched. A brass loop lay beside a tiny spring he'd been staring at for an hour without seeing. He'd returned hours ago, or maybe only minutes. It was impossible to know. Whatever had flung him through time had also muddled its passage. His body ached like he'd run a marathon. His heart ached like something far worse. He turned Lydia's watch over again, cradling it gently. The etched word on the underside, remember, was unmistakably hers. Not just the handwriting, but the tone, the certainty. It wasn't an instruction. It was a trust. Outside, the street was waking up. Someone swept the sidewalk next door. A car door slammed. The clatter of bins echoed down the narrow lane. Modern London went on, as it always had, oblivious to what it had nearly lost, or what it had unknowingly gained. Elliot finally rose, his limbs stiff, and carried both watches to the center table, where he usually placed completed work ready for pickup. He unrolled a piece of deep navy velvet and placed them side by side. They didn't hum now. They didn't glow. They just ticked. But to him, they still resonated, like two voices calling to each other across centuries. He retrieved his grandfather's loupe, slid it over his eye, and began inspecting the casing of the cracked watch, the one they'd taken from Hawthorne. It was damaged but not destroyed. The escapement needed a delicate realignment, and the bridge had been forced slightly off axis from whatever rough hands had tried to tamper with it. It would take time to fix, real time, with patience and care. He smiled faintly. Lydia would approve. By noon, the sun finally pushed past the clouds. Light spilled in through the front windows, bouncing off the brass and glass of 100 clocks. Elliot looked around the shop as if seeing it for the first time. Dust danced in gold shafts. Somewhere deep in the shop, a grandfather clock struck 12 with a confident chime. It was the first time in weeks the sound hadn't made him feel lonely. The doorbell jingled suddenly, breaking the stillness. Elliot turned, startled. A woman stood in the doorway, older, sharp-eyed, gray hair pulled into a precise bun. She carried a canvas bag over one arm and held an antique wall clock in both hands. "Are you open?" she asked. He blinked. Yes, sorry, I'm open." She smiled faintly. "Your sign was turned around, but the light was on. I figured I'd try." He stepped forward and gently took the clock from her arms. "What seems to be the problem?" "It stopped ticking 2 days ago. It belonged to my husband's grandfather. It's very dear to him." Elliot nodded, cradling the piece in practiced hands. It was an early 1900s French regulator, finely made, the kind of work that would last centuries if given care. "I'll take good care of it," he said. Her eyes roamed the shop. "Beautiful place. Is it yours?" "It was my grandfather's," he said. "I just inherited it." She smiled gently. "Then you understand the value of keeping things running." After she left, he placed the regulator on the back bench and sat again, hands resting on his thighs. The quiet had changed. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like listening. He returned to the table and lifted Lydia's watch. The casing was still slightly warm from where he'd been holding it all morning. The ticking was steady, trusting. He turned it in his palm, then opened the backplate again, not to tamper, not to fix, just to look, to see it. The inner etching, remember, gleamed in the light. He wanted to write her a letter. He wanted to carve messages into every brass gear in the shop, hoping they might somehow reach her. But he knew that wasn't how this worked. There would be no message back, no humming light, no second time slip. Still, she had left something with him. Not just the watch, not just the memory. Her mother had believed time could give second chances. Maybe not in the way everyone expected, but in moments like this, in tiny repairs, in listening, in waiting. Elliot spent the afternoon restoring the cracked watch, not fast, not perfect, but with the same care his grandfather had once taught him. Slow movements, steady hands, total attention. He cleaned each gear, filed down the pitted pivot, and reshaped the resonance fork Lydia had once touched. When it was finished, he polished the case and placed it beside its twin. The two watches now ticked again in perfect harmony, like a matched pair of lungs breathing. He placed a new placard above the display case, the Halewood Resonance Twins circa 1820s, restored 2025, built with mirrored resonance springs. Their purpose remains part mystery, on loan from history. He sat back, satisfied. His shop felt different now, not just a place of old gears and aging clocks. It felt watched, known, as if time itself had been dusted off. As he moved to turn off the bench lamp, something caught his attention. The watches. They were glowing again, faintly at first, like they had when he first returned, then stronger. The golden light flared outward, climbing up the glass sides of the case, reflecting in endless looping arcs. Elliot's breath caught. The watches began to vibrate, ticking faster, humming now in a familiar resonant tone. It wasn't random. It was rhythm. It was recognition. He stood slowly, heart pounding. Lydia? The velvet beneath the watches rippled. And then, just as before, there was light. Not sharp this time. Not blinding. Warm. Enveloping. It filled the room like sunlight underwater. Then, a figure stepped forward from the light, boots landing softly on the workshop floor just beside the case. She was there. Her braid gleamed with flecks of copper. She wore her linen coat. She still held the tiny brass winding key. And her eyes, when they met his, were unmistakably real. "Hello, Elliot," she said softly. Elliot's legs nearly gave out. "Lydia." "I hope I'm not late," she said, stepping toward him, eyes dancing. "How?" His voice cracked. She glanced at the watches. "Your repairs reactivated the resonance. I felt it." Her fingers trembled slightly. "It's not permanent. Not yet, but it opened long enough." He stepped toward her. You came through." "For now," she said, "if you'll have me." He didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in, and she melted into him like she'd never left. The warmth of her, the weight of her, it was real. And it was everything. "I missed you," he said. "I told you to remember," she murmured. He laughed, breathless. "I did, every second." She pulled back just slightly, fingertips brushing along his jaw. "You've been busy." Her lips curled. "That display case? It's a little crooked." He laughed, this time without the ache, and leaned in close. "You're here." She nodded once, then rose onto her toes and kissed him. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't grand. It was simple and right. Like the soft tick of a clock falling into rhythm, like home. When she pulled back, she stayed close. "How long do we have?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, "but I'd like to spend it here, with you, if you'll teach me how to fix that monstrosity by the back wall." "You mean the rusted French regulator?" "The very one," he grinned. "Deal." They moved to the back bench, the shop folding in around them like a well-oiled casing. He showed her the fault in the anchor pin. She teased him about his tool organization. He told her about digital time. She said it sounded fake. Outside, London moved on. Buses hissed. People hurried. The city lived. But inside Perrin and Son's timepieces, time stood still, as two people who loved clocks and time worked together. At closing, Elliot flipped the sign to closed, then paused. He found a pen, took down the placard from the display, and wrote something new. "Halewood and Perrin, makers of time." He stepped back. Lydia slipped her hand into his. "I don't want to lose time again," she said quietly. "You won't," he whispered. "Not anymore." And together, they watched and listened to the clocks.